Looks like my audio is working. Okay.
Okay, everyone's here at 6:30. We will call this meeting to order.
Ms. Ackerman,
Present.
Ms. Bates,
Here.
Mr. Dane,
Present.
Ms. Escobedo,
Present.
and myself, Mr. Johnson, present.
Great. We will do the consent calendar now.
Move to approve the consent agenda, which includes a Sunday entertainment license at 51 Walden Street and a one-day special liquor license for Forklift Catering of 301 Reservoir Street on March 3rd.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Bates,
Aye.
Mr. Dane,
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye.
and myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Okay, we will move on to the town manager's report.
Good evening, everyone. There is a complete copy of the report in your packet, and I will just highlight a few items, but happy to take questions on any of the items contained in the report. So the town received an MVP grant for a DC fast charger, which will be installed at Rideout Park. We're also happy to announce the launch of the Community Compost Pilot Program, with opportunities to drop off at the Beatty Center and 55 Church Street. We have additional information on the website for any residents that are interested in participating in this program. The Department of Energy Resources is in the process of updating the Stretch Energy Code, and there is an opportunity for interested parties to participate and provide comments on the draft that is available. The DOER is taking comments through 5 p.m. on March 9th. We have received over 500 surveys in response to the survey that the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail has posted on the Junction Park safety issue. That survey is still live, so anybody who has not yet had the opportunity to participate can do so, and that can be found on the town's website. On January 25th, the EPA announced that it will be issuing a general NIPDES permit to medium-sized wastewater treatment plants within the Commonwealth. The town of Concord has one of these medium-sized wastewater treatment plants, which is defined as a plant that processes between 1 and 5 million gallons per day. The issuance of a general permit represents a new approach. Prior, there were individual permits that were issued to each of the plants, but the requirements are the same. In late 2021, Mass DEP promulgated new water quality standards that are now being reviewed by EPA, and new permit limits are determined using both the old and the new water quality standards. New requirements will include ambient monitoring of pH, temperature, and phosphorus, as well as PFAS. On February 8, 2022, the town received its general permit, noting a 60-day period for public comment, which will end on April 11. The draft general permit for Concord fails to acknowledge our request for a 10% increase in the rolling average effluent flow, leaving our permitted flow at 1.2 million gallons per day. This is of specific concern because it does limit future growth and development of the town. And we will be responding to the permit, and you should expect to hear more from us on this topic in the near future. The Board of Health will be reviewing its mask mandate at its monthly meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. I believe the recommendation is that the staff recommendation will be that the mask mandate be lifted as of March 7th. Our economic vitality and tourism staff is working with the DHCD Downtown Initiative consultant, and we'll be setting up 4 focused group meetings on February 15 and 16 to get input from property owners, business owners, nonprofit, culture arts groups, and restaurant owners to provide input on their thoughts and observations of doing business in Concord. The town manager's office, natural resources and health divisions will be meeting with the water quality subcommittee of the White Pond Advisory Committee to discuss sampling for the upcoming season. Some updates from our Council on Aging. They are continuing to offer grab and go meals on Wednesdays. They have movies at noon on Fridays, and they have a stash of masks, disposable masks for any seniors who are interested in receiving them. The Friends of the Public Library music series concert that was scheduled for February 12th has been continued to February 26th due to the closing of the main library. And as reported last week, just a reminder to the community that the main library remains closed this week and will reopen this Saturday, the 19th. And then the children's library will remain closed for an additional week, reopening on Saturday, February 26th. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you very much again for another very comprehensive report. Questions from the board? I see Henry.
Can I ask on the wastewater treatment issue, is that a ruling based on the capacity or design of our treatment plant, or is it an absolute restriction regardless of what we do to our treatment plant?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, our current plant has the capacity to process up to 10% more than we are currently permitted to process. And so we were looking to get that added into our permit so that on a regular basis, we can process the additional capacity.
So that means that no matter what we do to our treatment plant, we at this point cannot get any greater permission to process effluent.
That's correct. So we have to be permitted, regardless of the size of the plant we have to be permitted. We can only process what is included in our permit.
And that's based on factors other than the design or capacity of our plant.
Correct. That comes from the regulatory authority.
So to follow up on that, I have questions. Did they give reasons why they're not going to give this permission? And my other question is, how can the select board help? I understand there's a comment period. Do you need a letter from us, a vote, or whatever?
So I guess the simplest response is we will be back in touch with you in the near future if there is a role for the select board. We're still reviewing this internally and then with the Public Works Commission. But if there's an opportunity for the select board or a need for the select board to be involved, we will definitely let you know, because it was a big disappointment that there was not acknowledgement of our interest in increasing our permitted capacity.
And did they give a reason why?
Not that I'm aware of, that it just was not even acknowledged in the draft that we received back.
Wow.
That the request was not acknowledged.
Okay, other questions for the town manager, Matt?
For the stretch energy code, is our sustainability director planning to make a response, or what? Is there any town initiative to respond to the draft regulations?
I believe so, but I will follow up with her and let you know, or to confirm that she will be providing a response.
Thanks.
Other questions from the board? I have one comment that I'm delighted to see that police will be seeking accreditation. That is excellent. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, we'll look forward to hearing more about the wastewater plant. Okay, chair's remarks. Our next meeting will be February 28th. And we will be having a very short meeting at 6:30. And then we will be going to the public hearing for the annual town meeting. There are 5 public hearings. The first one is February 28th, and the other 4 are the following 2 weeks in March. I have contacted Linda about presenting Article 24. I have contacted Susan about presenting Article 12. The reason I've contacted them is because they are the liaisons, and I plan to present Article 36, unless anyone has a problem with that. And as we get closer to town meeting and we're taking position on articles, there will be many more opportunities to present at town meeting and write blurbs in the Finance Committee book. I also want to ask the board if on the 28th, we are going to be meeting live, I think, for the public hearing. The Omicron cases are still declining. The mask mandate will still be in effect, but about to come off. So I think we should continue our select board meeting live that night while we're in the building. And then perhaps continue live after that every week. But I wanted to get your thoughts very briefly. Does anyone prefer that we meet by Zoom every week, or do you want to start meeting live if we can? Susan?
I would prefer live if it's possible,
Okay.
but I had a question about what you're talking about. Do we, I was just looking through my paperwork, the articles that the select board is responsible for in this hearing, is there a list? I thought there.
That's the list. Okay, there's several. lists. One list is what we are the sponsors for.
Okay,
Is 12, 24, and 36. Then there's another list of what is coming on the night of our hearing, which is, we will be doing most of the petition articles. The entire list is on the cover of the warrant, or the first page of the, or second page of the warrant. It says for each of the hearing nights, which articles will be heard in each night.
thank you.
Is your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Okay. The other thing I want to announce is that on February 16th at 4 p.m., the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail will be holding a forum, the first of several forums on the Junction Park. It will be by Zoom from 4 to 6 p.m. this Wednesday. And that's it for my remarks. And we will move on now to the Espet Bridge update. I see Marcia is here. Thank you for coming tonight, Marcia. And thank you for your detailed response. We did have several questions on the permitting costs. So let's see, I don't know how you want to proceed. I guess what happened was last week, Matt had asked what are the total costs for this permitting and engineering? And so Marcia, do you want to give us a very brief synopsis of your memo?
Okay. I don't know if it can be brief, but I'll try. Elizabeth Hughes, town planner Elizabeth Hughes, has been the primary liaison to the consultants working on this. So I relied on several of the documents that she has pulled together. She prepared the memo that you have, and then you had some follow-up questions, but the memo that was prepared and in your packet talks about the community feedback, the reason why we were pursuing it, and the amount of work that needs to be done for Mass DOT in order to have this bridge considered for the transportation improvement program, where the state would pick up the funding for the construction of the project. And that detailed the various aspects and the stages that need to be, or the various aspects that one would follow to get it to that point. Your follow-up questions and who it serves. And so this would serve a wide variety of people. There are over, just under 1,500 people who work on Baker Ave in the various businesses that are there. There is Concord Green, which has 250 units of housing. And there's 118 room residence inn also over at Baker Ave. So all of our visitors, all of the workers, and some of the residents would be able to access this bridge on a regular basis to get back and forth between West Concord Village, the MBTA commuter station, and Baker Ave businesses. Additionally, anybody who is planning to go to these businesses could, since there are so many doctors' offices over at Baker Ave, could use that as a way of getting there, walking there, if they were to walk up the trail or ride their bikes or whatever. So, so the series of questions that that you've raised outside of this memo is how much has been spent so far, and what has it cost to design. It's going to be about $1 million to, at the end of the day, to design this. And so far, the contracts that are in place are about 300,000 of that amount. That involves the initial feasibility study, which was about $10,000, some initial design work and charrettes that we had held and had public input on, and that was about $35,000 or $40,000. And then there was the wetlands delineation survey work prepared, and some initial structural design underway. So what is being sought right now is the next phase of design, and that is about $710,000. 300,000 would be coming, we've requested from the Community Preservation Committee, and that will be heard at this year's annual town meeting. An additional $300,000 is being sought from a Mass Trails grant, which is a state agency. And then $110,000 was initially proposed for the capital improvement program, but had to be cut because of the other competing higher priority programs and projects. So the suggestion was made that perhaps ARPA funding could cover this additional $110,000. The cost to construct was one of the questions raised, and that's so far, according to the CPC application that was submitted in September, that is estimated between $4 to $5 million. And again, the state would cover the full cost of that installation, I believe. Now, there may be some design details because we are working with an architecture firm in addition to an engineering firm to make this an aesthetically pleasing facility and take advantage of the wild and scenic river that is the Assabet River, and to make it an enjoyable place to be, and to provide screening from the commuter rail so that we don't have a conflict in the visual impacts. And then another question was raised, have the owners along Baker Ave been approached? And they have initially. In fact, they provided the initial $10,000 to do the feasibility study when the property was redeveloped back in 2001. And then as we were moving forward, and they provided for easements to install abutments at both 300 Baker Ave, and then as Concord Park Assisted Living was permitted over the years, they also allowed for an easement for the abutments for a bridge. So this was envisioned for a number of years and was part of the 2010 work of the West Concord Task Force. It's in the master plan that was prepared. We did a study with the Central Transportation Planning staff to look at our first mile, last mile to see what it was like to gain access from the train station to Baker Ave, and that was done in 2016. And then it was again included in the Envision Concord. So there are a number of boards and committees that have reviewed this and are in support of it, such as the West Concord Advisory Committee, the West Concord Junction Cultural District, and probably others that I haven't even begun to think of, but I know that the Economic Vitality Committee might be interested because this is a way of bringing people back and forth to the commercial district. There may be others that would promote the sustainability because it allows a better experience for people walking or biking. And so then the current owners have just recently provided us with an initial easement for extending the bridge access path all the way to Baker Ave, which makes it a publicly accessible path to a public way. And that's what makes it eligible for the state funding. So that's the overall project in as brief I can be. There are probably many questions that you still have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. That was, your memo was quite comprehensive. My question is, if you don't get the 110 in ARPA funds, what's plan B? Is there a cutting back that can be done, or do you just have to find another source?
Plan B would be to try to find another source.
Mhm. Thank you.
Other questions? Linda?
Thank you, Marcia. You're so good about outlining the detail for all of us. That's helpful. In one of the columns where you were talking about the costs and who was contributing what amount, you had a 300 town matching. Sorry, 370 maybe town matching. Did that include the CPC and something else, or?
When it's combined, it's actually 410, and the 300,000 would be CPC, and the 110 was what we anticipated to be in the capital improvement program.
Okay, thank you.
Matt?
Yeah, I just am curious what other kinds of projects we've got on the tip right now, waiting, for the state to build them out. I mean, I think there's one for Elm Street, going towards the Acton line. I'm just trying to see, I mean, just because something gets on the tip doesn't mean it gets built, right? I mean, I know that there was supposed to be a flyover of the Rotary, right? For the last, I don't know how long. So can you describe kind of what's the probability of okay, we get it, we design it, but will it get built?
The tip is a really Byzantine kind of process. And frequently it's the large scale projects that are included on the tip. When they are unable to move forward in a timely manner, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, moves forward with smaller projects that are shovel ready. And if we have this fully designed, it would be considered shovel ready, and it is a relative for the MPO, a relatively small cost project. And so there is probably a good chance that in the next 2 to 5 years, within that time frame, that it could be funded.
And then other projects that we have that we're trying to prioritize for the tip. Do we have other shovel ready projects that are in the hopper?
Well, the planning division does not, other than the last half mile of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Primarily it is Public Works that has these projects moving forward. And I don't know what their current I think that's a question that Public Works Director Alan Cathcart might be able to answer, or Town Engineer Steve Dukran.
All right, and then it sounds like, when we were first looking at this project, the budgets were significantly less, but you're saying that the step change was due to if we're applying for TIP funding, that they have additional regulations that I guess we didn't anticipate back when we were first planning this. Or I'm just trying to understand, like, how I understand that you're saying we have a more rigorous process with the TIP, but I guess I remember a number of like 2.6 million for total project cost, and I remember thinking that was high, but now it's 5 or so, and I don't think that includes the design costs. So I just still kind of confused how in relatively short order it's gotten so much higher.
As I said, Elizabeth Hughes has been the one who has been coordinating all of this with the engineers and the architect. Everything has gone up in cost.
Sure.
And
I
so
understand that.
again, we're doing our best to estimate what it might be, again, projecting out within that 5-year time frame. So I can ask for further information and an update.
But then there would be kind of a way to limit the any additional cost increases at this point. I mean, basically the contracts that we would be signing now with sort of known costs would get us to a permitting stage, more or less. I mean, I know there could always be some things in the works, but that it's not like there's, next whole phases that we might have to fund that could yet be more expensive. Or that's what I'm trying to understand. Is this it, or is for us?
This final request, up to 710,000, is to get the plans and the specifications to the PS&E, the plan specification and estimate phase, which is the last and final phase before it goes to bid with Mass DOT.
But you were talking about also those architectural design features. Is that in addition to this?
No, that will be included.
That would be
in this.
included.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I have a similar question. I know when we're building a building, there is some kind of rule of thumb that the design is something like 10 or 15% of the construction cost. And in this case, this is not a building, but it's closer to 20-25% of the construction cost. But that might be because you have all of these extras like the wetlands and the architectural aesthetically pleasing. I just want to get a sense of, is that why it's higher than the 15%?
And the structural, you're talking about building a bridge in a river. So you are dealing with all the seasonal flows, ice and ice flows. So you have to design it so that it can withstand Mother Nature. And that costs more.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? I love this project. I can't wait till it gets done. I think it's going to be incredible. But it is a lot costing more than we expected. But anyway, hopefully we'll get the tip money. Other questions from the board on this? Okay, thank you. Our next item is the Christopher Heights Concord Home Funds. We have Marcia and Liz Rust here.
And I just wanted to note that as a near butter, I'm going to recuse myself from this, so I'll turn off my camera and mute myself during the deliberations.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, who would like to go first, Liz or Marcia?
Well, I think it was Liz who prepared the memo for you, so I will fill in whatever. But Liz is so
Okay.
comprehensive. I'm just here as support.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. Excuse me. I'm Liz Rust. I'm the director of the Regional Housing Services Office and a Concord resident as well. So I'm just going to briefly summarize the memo that you have in your packet. This is about home funds. The home funds come from the home investment program that's from HUD. And these funds flow through to Concord through the Newton Home Consortium. And so this is to see whether the town might agree to direct $345,000 of home funds to Christopher Heights, which would be comprised of previously funds from the Housing Authority, Commonwealth Avenue, known as the Giroux Project, and as well as the FY23 Concord allocation of $28,000. So this request was reviewed and supported by both the Housing Authority and the CHDC. And the West Metro Home Consortium also agreed for the portion of funds that belong to them. So by way of background in the home program, home funds are allocated to each member community, and you have 1 year exclusive use period to apply the funds to an eligible home project. Eligible home projects are low-income rental projects. If the funds aren't used by a community or don't have projects that are earmarked, then they flow into a pool, which then projects can apply from a competitive RFP basis. Concord has been successful in applying to that RFP pool 3 times now. And has directed $614,000 of past home projects for the Peter Bulkley Phase 2. There was a CHA owned property on Thoreau Street, and also has already earmarked $511,000 and $400 to Christopher Heights already. And these funds have been a combination of exclusive use and RFP funds. So just a nature on the funds, that these are really directed by Concord, but they're not Concord funds. They don't pass through the town warrant or accounts, and they're not raised through the taxpayer levy, but they are directed by the town, but they're all fully housed in Newton, and they go right to the developer. So this request stems from increases in construction costs on both sides. This was the Housing Authority released their funds. As you recall, they had their project that was very expensive when they got initial estimates from the architect. So they decided that they would go another path, and they're working on an RFP for a third-party development and sale. And in that process, it would not be eligible for the home funds. So they released their commitment on the funds and yes, released that. So it was really just a question then of what would Concord choose to do with those funds. In terms of Christopher Heights, they have been awarded almost $13 million from various sources on the state level. And they've gotten these local home funds and local funds from Concord as well. The pandemic hit just as the project was completing its pre-closing tasks, the biggest which was the wastewater treatment facility, which the regulations had changed during the whole permitting process and funding awards. So new standards were required, which took a long time to sort out and to work into the budget, new standards being also more expensive standards. Updated budgets produced a new gap. DHCD has increased their funding amounts, and the developer made some adjustments and concessions on their side to narrow the gap. Specifically, they deferred the full amount of their development fee from usually that comes in terms of, they call it tax credit equity, would be like at closing, they would get their development fee. And they've moved that now to not picking their development fee till available cash flow after occupancy. So really moving it quite substantially. The developer, as you know, and the town also has been working on this project for probably more than 10 years now, something. So both parties are very vested in this project and are really trying to make this work at the, right up here to the end. So the developer is pursuing a bridge loan, just that they're looking for a gap between the building permit and the occupancy permit. We have our monthly status meeting with them tomorrow, so we'll hear more about that. And they didn't ask for these funds in terms of administering the home program and looking for when the Housing Authority was releasing their funds, looking to see where they could be placed because they need to be awarded, in a timely basis, that there were just no other projects in Concord. So it was the logical request to see about placing these funds into the Junction Village. So if Concord chooses not to make this allocation, the funds would release back to the consortium competitive pool and would be used by another community for some, similar project. Certainly Christopher Heights isn't the only project that is finding construction pricing gaps and increases. In fact, last time we met with Walter, he said the construction prices were going up 2% every month. So just big increase. And so there's many projects looking for additional funding, just a little gap funding that got caught right as the pandemic hit. So I understand, of course, that, that this request might be in conflict to the memorandum of understanding. So I put that right here in the memo because I do understand that sensitivity. That's what I mentioned, right? I can offer that the developer did not specifically ask for these home funds, and it came from the RHSO and working to administer the home program to the best of Concord's interests. A little blurb here on the, or a little note here on the SHI recalibration. We know that, getting the building permits for Christopher Heights is really key for the SHI tracking. So the project's been delayed, but so has the census. So both delays have kind of staved off the recalibration of the SHI. So I think that summarizes the key points, and glad to hear and answer any further questions and to hear your comments.
Thank you, Liz. Are there questions from the board? Henry?
I'm not sure I know what this project is. Is this the one that was the on the former Boston Gas land that was to be the assisted some large number of assisted living units to which the town gave substantial tax breaks?
So this is, it's not Boston Gas, it was Department of Corrections, but I think it's the same project at the end of Winthrop Street in West Concord, 83 units of assisted living, and there was a tax incremental financing agreement that was reached with the town, as well as $2 million of local funds.
And that was the one where we agreed that regardless of the value of the real estate, they would pay the town $50,000 a year in lieu of taxes, or in satisfaction of their tax obligation. Am I thinking of the right project?
You are thinking of the right. I don't know if that's the exact number, 50,000, but that is the general idea. Yes.
And I know that when this was being considered by the Finance Committee, they were very they're very reluctant to provide any financial information about the financing of the project. Has that reluctance been overcome, or do we still know very little about how they're financing it and where the money is coming from, and what the financial benefits to the developers will be?
I think that the financing has been pretty open and available, so I'm not sure I know that.
Well, I think for just we had asked about the economics of similar projects that they have done in other towns, and they were, I think, if I recall correctly, they were unwilling to provide such information.
There was been a lot of discussions in the past.
Yes.
That's all I can say.
Oh, as a follow-up to that, actually, I was going to ask this development fee that is being deferred. How much is that?
$1.3 million.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board? Linda?
So thank you for this. And, we, of course, have put these home funds to good use on other projects in town as well. And I guess I have one question here in terms of the proposed additional funds, the non-competitive ones, the ones that are local home funds. This proposal is also suggesting that the FY23 funds, home funds, local home funds be put towards this project. Here's my question, and it has to do with timing that you may be able to correct. And that is, if in fact town meeting approves the funds and project for the Assabet River Bluffs project, would these home funds for FY23 in fact apply to that project as well?
That project, as it's crafted right now, is purely the acquisition of land with no development and construction budget. So the funds can only be used on a project that has a full construction all-in budget, and they can be part of that. So, it would probably be a couple of years out to even see whether the project would be home funds eligible for Assabet River Bluff.
And it would have to be a rental project. And there are other limitations that go along with use of home funds, which makes it challenging.
Low-income rental, right? Low-income rental.
All right.
I was also going to ask about that. I was trying to think of some other low-income rentals that we might have. Is there any buy down in the works, or what about that project on 940 Main Street? Is that finished, or?
That's ownership.
Okay, that's ownership. Or any CHA property that needs repairs, or?
Well, they discussed it and they voted to release the funds to Junction Village.
The CHA?
Mhm, mhm.
Henry?
One other comment, and that is, we haven't really discussed at any of our meetings. I think the coming MBTA zoning initiatives that would call for areas of multifamily housing in neighborhoods adjacent to the transportation hubs. And assuming that becomes a reality, which it looks like it will, do we need to rethink our whole housing policy? Because this will, I think, take us in those zoning requirements will take us in a totally different direction with regard not only to providing low cost housing, but also in how we deal with the challenges of Chapter 40B.
Right.
And I think a lot of what was driving this project was fulfilling the 40B quota, because there were a large number of units that would counted toward that quota.
So thank you for that, Henry.
Yeah, let me just say very quickly that at an upcoming agenda, it might be March 7th, very soon, we are going to be discussing these MBTA new regulations, and we might even have it as a joint meeting with the planning board. So we're thinking through exactly how we're going to approach that, and we'll have a whole agenda item just for that new MBTA regulation.
And those regulations would be.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. No, perfect. I think the timetable here is a little bit more immediate, irrespective of whether the funds align, policy wise and all that. I mean, the MBTA doesn't have any affordable component to those regulations, but whatever. I think the timeline itself, like if you don't decide today, the funds will release to the consortium, except for that $28,000 for the FY23. But the past funds that the CHA has released will release to the consortium in the next few months. So it's really a timetable kind of thing for this particular item again, irrespective of a general housing policy, which is a good conversation as well.
Okay. Additional questions? Linda, did you have more questions? I might have cut you off before.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Henry, Susan, more questions? I will say also that since Matt has recused himself, I will need one of you guys to find the wording of the motion. Whoever would like to volunteer. But are we ready for a motion? Do we want to have more discussion? What's the will of the board here?
Are we being asked to actually take a vote on this?
Yes, if we vote no, or we don't vote, then the fund will release to the pool and other towns can do an RFP to claim them. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think that it'd be helpful for you to take a vote either way. I mean, leaving it up to the pleasure of the board, but just so that it's very clear what the action for these funds will be in terms of communicating with the consortium.
Okay.
I'm ready to move along, but I don't have the motion.
I do.
Okay, are we ready to vote or do we need any more discussion? Okay, Linda, if you want to make the motion, that'd be great.
Okay. Move to approve the request by the Regional Housing Services Offices to transfer $144,345 in home funds from its previous allocations as discussed in the RHSO memo dated February 3rd, 2022 to the Christopher Heights Junction Village Project.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Okay, Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Bates,
Aye.
Mr. Dane,
No,
myself, Linda Escobedo, aye.
Okay, motion passes 3-1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to approving the Ripley formula for Concord. Okay, Matt is back. Great. Okay. By way of introduction, I will just say, I know Cynthia Rainey's here and she I was at the school committee meeting where they superintendent asked the business manager to put together a formula so that Carlisle can start paying its share of capital and hopefully even operational costs. And that is what this is all about.
So Terry, if I may interrupt, I'm sure the agenda meant to read approve Ripley formula for Carlisle and Concord as opposed to versus.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure in the motion we can say that, yeah. I think it means, how much Concord pay versus how much does Carlisle pay, right? Okay. So, Cynthia, do you want to talk about this at all?
Terry, at the appropriate time, I would like to talk about it as well.
So I will defer to interim town manager LaFleur, because this is a discussion between her and the Carlisle town manager. And we really didn't have a discussion as a school committee. So,
Okay,
thank you.
all right, great.
So, sure. So thank you. So just to provide some additional information for anybody that is listening to the meeting, there are a number of capital improvements that need to be made to the Ripley administration building over the next 3 years, which include replacing a boiler, paving the parking lot, and some sidewalk replacements, some extensive flooring replacements and installation or connecting to the sewer system. So in total, these projects over the next 3 years are several $100,000. Obviously, Ripley administration houses both administration for both of the school systems, Concord Public Schools and the regional school district. There has been a lot of discussion over several years that the town of Concord seems to have to pay for capital improvements, even for spaces that are jointly used between the two school systems. And there was an interest for these particular set of improvements that there be some formal written agreement expressing what the cost share would be for these projects. The information that is in your packet is something that was prepared by school administration, and there was an initial discussion with school administration and the town administrator in Carlisle. There has since been more discussion in Carlisle, and there is not yet agreement with the finance committee and select board in Carlisle to this particular allocation. And so while you may wish to vote to accept the methodology and this proposed split of costs, we don't yet have the agreement from the town of Carlisle. So it may be helpful for you to go on record acknowledging that you think that this is a reasonable split or the methodology is reasonable, but we'll have to do some additional work with Carlisle in order to solidify this particular methodology.
Thank you for that, Terry. May I ask, what is the issue or the questions about the formula in the town of Carlisle?
I think the general issue really is from a philosophical stance for the town of Carlisle to be paying for capital improvements for a building that is within the town of Concord. And I would say I have not had the conversation that I had with the town administrator. I didn't realize that there was not complete agreement on his end when we had talked. So, and I have not yet had the chance to follow up with him since I found out that there was some concern either with the finance committee or the select board in Carlisle.
So they don't have a specific issue with the calculations and the formula. It's a philosophical thing of whether they should pay, period.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Other questions from board members? Henry?
Do we now allocate the cost of that building between the town of Concord Public Schools and the regional school district? And I assume that doing that, Carlisle pays a share of the operating costs of the building because we allocate between the two towns for the regional school district. And it seems like the percentage that is being given here, it must be far less than the share of the operating costs that they pay for the use of the building.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak for Cynthia Rainey or the school administration, but it is my understanding that the operating costs are allocated between the two.
Correct. This formula is pretty consistent with that. Yeah.
Oh, I misspoke when I said operating before. This is for capital only. I believe you're correct, Henry, that the operating, like utilities, is already accounted for in the high school budget, and then the assessments are divided.
Yep.
Okay. Matt?
Well, if they're unwilling to pay directly to capital costs, it seems like the formula should take into account the fully loaded operational costs, which include maintenance and improvements. Instead of buying, you're renting. But you know, it's going to end up being, I would assume, to be fair, around that same amount of money either way. I think that the formula as designed is a very fair formula. You know, for proportions. It's really then, okay, how do you treat the contributions? Are they to capital or to operations? But they still, it seems like, should be helping out with the long-term costs one way or another.
I agree. And I did have a question about, it looks very fair, but I have a question about the gym. What is the gym used for now?
So hopefully Cynthia could answer that question.
So I'm not going to say I know, but I pretty much think it's used for Concord recreation for the most part. But I don't know if Kate Hodges is on the call.
Kate, no, Kate is not.
So we would need to confirm that. That's my hunch.
You're saying there are some Concord recreation programs held in that gym.
Correct.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Okay. And as far as the CASE collaborative and the pre-K, those are only Concord. There are not pre-K students, I guess, from Carlisle, because they're not an Arcata 8 system.
Correct.
And what about the CASE
That's
collaborative,
Concord as well.
where the host community and we apportion out to the other
Yes.
members? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Carrie, why do you think it would be helpful if the Concord Select Board likes this formula and we agree and we vote for it? Why will that help move things to Carlisle?
I think it would help further the discussion if I knew there was agreement on that the select board is in support of asking the town of Carlisle to participate in these capital improvements. I could go back to them with that and try to further this discussion.
Well, wouldn't one of their concerns be that if they're going to make a capital investment of their proportionate share, they would need some assurance that the building would continue for the indefinite future to be available for the regional school district for its its administrative offices. And is that part of the plan? And is that something we can assure them of?
So unless I'm mistaken, I believe this building is still under the jurisdiction of Concord Public Schools and the school committee.
And I mean, the administrative offices of the school committees have moved from place to place over the years. And at least there are some who feel that that is not the ideal location, for the administrative offices. And if they were to make a capital investment in the facility, and then we decided that the offices were to move someplace else, they might have concern about that. And it would be legitimate.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And maybe we can put something in that if the school administration for the district moves, in the next 10 or 20 years or whatever you want to put in, that get a proportion of their money back or something like that. Because I don't think we have any plans to move right now, but maybe it would be good to give those assurances.
So I'm happy to, I need to follow up with the Carlisle Town Administrator to find out specifically what the concerns are and if the long-term use of this building by the district's administration is one of their concerns, then we'll have to address that if we want them to participate in the funding.
Okay, further discussion. I think we should take a motion tonight and give Carrie the means to go back and continue the conversation. And then we may have to put this back on our agenda if there are concerns we have to address. So I think we're ready for a motion at this.
Sure, move to approve the capital formula calculation for the Ripley Administration Building as presented in our packet and discussed during this meeting.
Second,
Roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Bates,
aye.
Mr. Dane,
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye.
and myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to Dr. Hunter and to Jared for working on this. I think it's long overdue and I hope we get an agreement. Great idea. Okay, we are now up to the ARPA follow-up. And the way I'd like to handle this is I'm hoping that each select board member had time to look at these lists and spreadsheets. And if you, I'm going to go in the order of page 16 in the packet, which lists the projects by type. So,
Terry.
page 16. Linda?
Yeah, Terry, before you start, thank you. I think it would be helpful if you could sort of review quickly again what the process is going forward here, because,
Right.
we haven't yet heard what the department priorities are that have been identified. And
Right.
the response from the public on this has been fairly limited. So it would be helpful to have more of a context here before we.
Thank you, Linda. You're absolutely right. Let me back up. January 31st, we had a forum where we heard from several committees and some of the public. And since then, my understanding from Carrie is the SMT would like to see some select board initial priorities so that they can start working on that. And that's what we're going to do. This is maybe like a first pass at priorities. And Carrie, maybe you'd like to explain more about that.
Sure. So there were a number of projects and ideas that were presented at the last forum. All of them have different merits. We can't fund all of these requests, and we obviously it would be helpful to us if we understood what your priorities were, so we could start advancing some of these ideas and initiatives and more fully developing them and working with any boards or committees that would be involved, rather than just trying to advance everything and get to a point where we know we couldn't fund all of them, and we would have invested a lot of time in some things that we just don't have the financial ability to advance.
Thank you. And thanks again for the question, Linda. We needed some context. So I approached this all different ways, and I finally decided that the easiest way to go through tonight would be in the order on page 16. I divided it into 7 groups: affordable housing, broadband, transportation, DEI/health, economic vitality, salaries, and other. So I'd like to go through each one and see. Another thing that Carrie mentioned to me the other day is what we're going to do for each one is give it a 1, 2, or 3. 1 is a very high priority. We really want the staff to get working on it and come back to us with some really good ideas. Number 2 needs more discussion. It might be a priority. It's pretty good. And number 3, we're not going to make it a priority at this time. And so one of the things that Carrie mentioned was for everything that's a number 3, for example, the staff won't spend any time on it yet. And it gives them some focus. So again, this is going to be a preliminary priority tonight. It may be that once we hear more from the public, once staff comes back, you know, there could be some factors where we change things around. So let's take a look first at affordable housing. We have Assabet Bluff, putting money in the housing trust, and additional affordable housing projects. And I'd like to go around and see from each of you where you think those things belong in terms of 1, 2, and 3. Who would like to go first? Okay, Susan.
I'll go first. I would give a 1 to Assabet Bluff and the Housing Trust, and 2 and possibly 3, 2/3 to the additional housing projects. I'm thinking in terms of the distribution of the funds and the priorities within each category.
Okay. I'll go next. I have Assabet Bluff and Housing Trust as a 1 or a 2. I guess I'd like to see one be a 1 and the other be a 2. That I'm not sure we can fund both of them out of ARPA, but we should definitely make housing a top priority in one of these ways and possibly the other. And as for additional affordable housing projects, I gave that one a 3 because I don't know what they are yet. So it was sort of an easy one to give a 3 to because we need a lot more discussion on it. Linda, Matt, and Henry, what do you think?
So the way, can I assume that the way we're thinking about this is that as we identify these priorities, we really should be thinking about the total amount of money over the total number of years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so, and then the other thing is that, you know, when you had this on the agenda previously, we identified that there are some rare opportunities that ARPA money in general is providing to communities that they don't normally have.
Right.
And so, you know, that's another piece of context here in terms of how we're thinking about it. Okay, so did you want me to comment on the housing? Is that what you wanted me to move to?
Yes.
Okay. And housing is one of the categories under ARPA funding that is a rare opportunity in terms of dollars being able to be directed to housing, which communities struggle for, including ourselves. So I guess I had Assabet Bluff and the Housing Trust both as 1. And I had additional affordable housing projects as 2. And the reason I didn't put it as 3 is because should Assabet River Bluffs be approved, you know, everything come together as we hope it will. We already know there are 2 existing housing units on that property that could immediately be made available for housing, even while we're working on a larger development plan. So that's just, you may not want all that verbiage, but that's how I got to my number.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Henry, do you want to go next?
Well, I'm having a lot of trouble with this process. I think one of the principles that I would try to apply to any of these categories is that the first preference should go to items that would otherwise have to be paid out of tax revenues. So that, in other words, they would be things that we were otherwise going to do, but would be increase the tax burden and increase the tax rate. So, and the other criterion I would apply to some of these things would be not so much whether they were desirable, but what was the probability that they were going to happen. So if you talk about capital expense for the housing trust, you know that's going to happen. And we don't know how it's going to be spent, but we know we can spend it and we can use it to build housing, and we can figure out how it will be used. And typically, we do use tax money to fund housing. We put a certain amount every year that we vote for housing. So I would say capital expense for housing trust is kind of a no-brainer. It's just a question of what the amount is. And I don't see how that's any different from capital expense for additional affordable housing projects. I think it's the same thing. So there's not much to choose between the two of them, but I think those should both be a priority. On the other hand, with Assabet Bluff, that's a project that I don't think we even know is going to happen. There's a lot of local neighborhood opposition to it. And there's also a question about whether we're getting good value for money, since a good portion of the property is in the Rivers Act buffer zone and can't be built on anyway. And I think that we came to the conclusion that, like with a number of other housing projects, the cost per unit of housing was going to be an unreasonable amount. So I would say I would put capital expense for additional affordable housing projects and capital expense for a housing trust both as a number one without distinguishing the two.
Mhm. Okay, and you would give Assabet Bluff a 2 or a 3?
I'll just try to be positive.
Okay. All right. And Matt?
Yeah, I think as I expressed last time, I'm opposed to a process where we would allocate these funds without approval of town meeting. So I'm going to give everything a 3 until we get down to G. So I think that you can just skip me for the rest of this discussion until we get to category G.
Okay.
And if you want, I can explain my position more, but you know, I know that it's not legally required because it's grant money that we can just decide how to spend it, but you know, I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay.
Mary, I wonder, does it make sense to have this discussion now rather than to go through the prioritization and then have the discussion that Matt would like to have after that?
Which way are you thinking of doing it?
Well, I'm just wondering if it makes sense to now talk about the idea of just taking this as lost revenue and
Right.
and prioritizing it and allocating it through the budget and annual budget and capital process.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to the priorities in a few minutes. Let's have that discussion. Carrie, do you have some comments about that?
No, I don't really, other than it would be helpful to know if how the board would like to proceed, whether it would like to prioritize expenditures sort of outside of the annual planning process, or to wait and do that within an annual planning process. From my perspective, either is fine. It would just be helpful to understand what the board would like to do.
But even if it's with, Carrie, just to flesh out the question or what we want to discuss, even if it's within the annual planning, budget planning process, it's still going to be treated separately, is it not? In terms of how these ARPA funds are distributed. Matt's shaking his head no, so
It doesn't have to be, because we can declare it to be lost revenue. And so therefore it becomes available funds that can be applied to our town budget.
Okay, I want to distinguish between the legal requirement, because Matt's correct. There is no legal requirement that we do these priorities. We can just throw it all in the operating budget. And if we don't spend it all, it can go into free cash. There is not any requirement to do otherwise. But I was thinking that politically, I would like to have a really transparent process where we get a lot of input and we actually discuss the priorities and that we end up with a list. We get this extra 5.6 million. What did we do with it? Oh, we put it in the budget process and we spent it. That's not how I want to end up. I want to end up saying we spent 500,000 on this project and 1 million on that project and this much on premium pay or whatever. I want to know what we spent it on in the end. So the other problem that I'm having also is that we actually have 3 budget processes, one operating with the guidelines from the FinCom that has its own set of rules. And at the end of the year, those funds go into free cash. They're not spent. Then we have a capital plan. We have kind of a 5-year plan for certain tiers. Then we have a long range capital plan. And then we have, and at the end of the year, the surplus does not go back to free cash for those. So at the very least, we have to decide how much goes to operating, how much goes to capital. And then there's enterprise funds. Are we going to put any into broadband or wastewater or any of these things? So in my opinion, I think we should go through this exercise and give Carrie some guidance. Not that it's set in stone, but give her a general idea of what we're thinking. I mean, it sounds like affordable housing so far is getting a pretty high priority. And I think that's really useful information for Carrie to take back to the SMT. So that's just my pitch. But let's see what you guys think. Henry?
This reminds me a lot of the process that the CPA goes through. You have a certain amount of money and you have to spend it on something and you just try and figure out who gets what. If we could do it, I think that's something we really ought to consider is taking the whole amount of the money and putting it in the middle school stabilization fund and getting the tax rate down by $1.50, so that we make the tax impact of the middle school palatable. I mean, that would not be a dumb thing to do if we could use the money for that. And
Right, so that's on the list.
rather than sitting around saying 100,000 for this one and 50,000 for that
Right.
one, it's
Okay.
we
The
can make a
middle
difference.
school- The middle school is on the list for that very reason. I don't know that we can charge all of that to it, but I think we need to give some guidance if that's a high priority. I know I ranked that one as number 1 as top priority as well. So this is what I think Carrie's looking for. What do we want to spend it on? And that is one of the categories on this list.
So if I could comment just on the idea of middle school stabilization fund. So the only way that you could do that is by calling this lost revenue. There's no way to directly allocate, and in fact, using ARPA to build up a reserve fund is specifically prohibited. So the only way that it could happen is if it's called lost revenue and taken in, becomes part of free cash, and then allocated as appropriated as free cash into that fund.
But it is on this list and it could be done.
I do believe that it can be done.
There are also, I think, some very small items that can be done with the playing fields or whatever, but for the most part, it would have to be done the way Carrie just described. So are people in favor of continuing to discuss the priorities or not?
I would add also that I think that the initiative to create a economic development a function within the town government is something that is a new initiative that we I think we're very likely to fund one way or another. And if we could,
Okay, Henry, that is one of the ones on the list. So that's what I'm saying. I would like to go through this list and see if the board can come to a consensus that, you know, yes, we want to put money in the rainy day fund for the middle school. Yes, we want affordable housing. Yes, we want this one. No, we don't want that one. That's what I'm trying to do with this list. So, Susan?
Well, I was, as you suggested in one of your later emails about this, that another way to think about it is within the broader categories. I'm not sure I'm prepared to say this project over this project within, say, economic resiliency. But I do think that it makes sense to me I like Henry's idea about the middle school, because that seems like a big, but I also think that this gives the opportunity to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. And what I was thinking of was like, for instance, infrastructure, water, sewer. That's not a very compelling project. I mean, a school is, and there are other things, a building that people can get behind. But when you say water, sewer, it doesn't sound all that interesting, but it's really important to the growth of capacity in those areas. So I think that that's important. I think transportation, we've been talking, and to be able to dive in somewhere like Crosstown Connect or something. And then the seniors and disabled, because the one of the points about ARPA was equity, and people who were more impacted by the COVID pandemic than others. And I agree with the economic, you know, some for economic resiliency, because certainly the business community suffered.
Okay, so you've given me an idea here. So some of your top priorities then are affordable housing, transportation like Crosstown Connect, this is for the disabled,
Infrastructure.
and right, water, sewer infrastructure, right. Are there any on the list that you think should not be a priority at this time? So maybe this is the easiest way to do it. We'll just go around and each person will say what your top things are and what are not your priorities. How's that? So Susan, do you see any on this list that that are like a number 3 that are not a top priority for you?
Well, see, that gets into the nitty gritty of, I'm not sure I want to decide within the category, but I don't quite know about the parking lot rehab and parking and the Beatty, those three at the end, the Beatty roof. I don't know. I mean, the Beatty had and wasn't an endowment. There was a fund that came with the gift, and I understood that was to cover capital, but COVID has sort of derailed a lot of our assumptions about finances. So again, I think that there are a lot of good ideas that came up in our meeting on the 31st, but there are places that, like seniors and assistance for seniors and the disabled, that really weren't represented at that meeting, and I wouldn't want to overlook it.
Okay.
Or anything that I haven't even thought of that some sector that
Right. Okay.
deserves consideration. So
Okay, thank you. So Henry, you're saying that one of your priorities is the middle school and another is the director of business development.
And a big negative would be a replacement of parking revenue until we get a better understanding of what the financial details of that situation are. I think that I would love to see a copy of the contract we have with our parking meter vendor to figure out what is really going on. Parking meters, from my experience, the parking is not enforced at all in the town center right now.
Right.
And that, I think, is some kind of executive decision made on the part of somebody. But and I think that that's the whole parking meter thing needs to be reconsidered before we throw more money at it.
Well, my understanding, I guess, Carrie, do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, so the issue with that is the fiscal 22 budget was put together with the understanding that $400,000 of ARPA would replace lost parking meter revenue. So that was part of the current year budget. And it was presented that way and voted that way at town meeting.
And I assume that money is already spent, whether we have a source for it or not. Either it comes out of tax revenue or it comes out of ARPA.
I would say it's committed, but it's not expended. And I would be happy to go back and look at that and see if we could get by with something less. Could we do, 300,000 instead of 400,000 or 250? I could take another look at that.
Okay.
Right.
It just seems that there's it's difficult to understand what is going on with the parking meter situation, especially since they do not seem to be productive of revenue, and have never really been fully functional. And I think that it's something that's really worth delving into. This is not the place, I think, to deal with it. But if we're going to devote revenue to it, I want to understand how the thing works.
Right. Okay. And what do you have in the budget for 23? Carrie, do you have, we continue with the same contract and again, we need more ARPA money or what is it?
No, we're not expecting any ARPA funding to supplement the fiscal 23 budget or any of the 23 budgets.
Okay. All right. Henry, do you have any other big high or low priorities on this list?
Yeah, well, yes, one other thing that is, I'm curious as to why the improvement of cell service, which is a very high priority, I think, or it should be a very high priority, costs us money. And it should not cost us much because most of the facilities are built by people who own, lease, and make money by building and renting out towers to carriers. And so I don't know why it will cost us money to improve the service. I think we just have to negotiate the right kinds of deals with the people who are in the business of providing cell service.
Right, so it does depend upon how we go about it. And I think that the biggest issue in the center is the location where the tower would need to be. And there have been multiple locations that have been vetted. And one that seems to have the most traction is at on the Kais Road campus. But there are some issues with that because due to the height of the tower, the top of the tower is visible at the bridge. And so the National Park Service does have some concern about it. But certainly if there was a way to get something done privately, then there wouldn't be a cost to the town. And I do understand that the Tricon Church is looking at replacing one of its existing carriers with Verizon. And if that is to move forward, then that would have a marked improvement on the functionality of our meters. Because one of the issues is they need Verizon service to operate properly, and that would also help with our public safety communications in the center. But the cost, there would be a cost if the town were to construct a tower on town property, but then we could potentially lease out to, or we would be leasing out to carriers and receiving some revenue.
Okay. All right. Linda and Matt, do you want to just say what your top few priorities are and what your, well, Matt, you already said you think everything is a 3 except for section G. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so my proposal has been to take this money, which is 3 times what the Community Preservation Committee spends an entire year vetting, and to instead look at it from the way that the federal government does. I think they allow us to look at it as lost revenue. And I believe there's evidence for that. When you look at our historically low free cash balance, you know, we weren't able to collect as many revenues as we did. And so we weren't able to do things that we wanted to, and we're in a tougher place financially. So my proposal would be to take the first, we have 4 fiscal years we could apply this to, starting with this fiscal year, FY22. And I would suggest taking 1 quarter, 1.4 million, apply it to our free cash balance, restoring some of the health to our current free cash balance, and then not take all this money right now and say, oh, let's find all the things we want to spend it on and spend it on it now, but instead allocate that over the next 3 fiscal years in the future and roll it into the budget, because it does reflect lost budget revenue. So it is a 1-for-1. It is quite transparent from that point of view. The nice thing about using this money into free cash, like for this fiscal year, is there already are proposed uses of that free cash that are on our town meeting warrant, such as affordable housing. So this gives an opportunity for the voters to vote for an article that would take money from free cash for affordable housing, rather than us sit here and say, let's put money into the trust, us, the select board. Much better process from my point of view. And I think just the starting point, because as then we go into further fiscal years and we have this additional little bit of funding, it will get us a little bit closer to being able to do various of these projects, but using our process that we have for allocating capital funds, for allocating expenses, and getting the town to approve them through our town meeting and having public hearings on those processes rather than us sitting here now and deciding how to spend the money. So that's my view.
Okay, and you mentioned that in section G, the middle school, the rainy day
The
fund.
closest thing I could find is rainy day fund, but that's
Okay.
not really a direct fit for what we're proposing.
Okay, okay. All right. And Linda, what are your, you said affordable housing was one of your top priorities, especially the Aspect Bluff and the Housing Trust.
Yep. Well, you could hear how I started this conversation trying to get us to talk about context and the process in the beginning. And it was also difficult for me to go through this in terms of rating the priorities without knowing what the town priorities were from town staff and the departments and what they've been working on. And so, I guess I'm too having difficulty with this process. If I'm forced to rate these things, clearly, the lens that I already labeled was that ARPA allows some opportunities to, particularly in a couple areas that don't typically have the funding source to proceed. And obviously housing was one of them. I see on this list some additional positions, both economic development and transportation related, that we've talked about in our plans. My concern about pulling them out as priorities on the ARPA list is the extent to which then we have set up positions that then are fixed parts of the budget going forward, whether, without understanding whether we can afford to do that, totally afford to do that. And I could, broadband, we've talked about the equity issue there in terms of getting some really important infrastructure work done. Can that be handled through the capital budget process in the way that we're, if we looked at the whole budget, or do we pull that out as one of the priorities? So, I was looking at bigger chunks as opposed to, every single line item if I had to do that. But I am concerned about setting up, particularly in terms of positions and or exorbitant sustainability and maintenance costs for whatever infrastructure improvements we do, that we're not looking at the longer term implication of that.
Okay, those are good comments. So now I'd like to turn to Kerry and see, so are you getting what you need, Kerry, from us to go back to the SNT and have some
Or
folks?
is she getting a big headache?
So I guess the biggest issue is since we became aware that we were receiving ARPA funding, it was my understanding through conversations, even with the prior town manager, maybe with the chair, that the select board wanted to be very involved in the prioritization process. And so if I'm not sure that I'm convinced that the select board wants to, that I don't want this to sound negatively. I don't know if you're looking for more direction, suggestion, information from staff. I was thinking I'm looking more from you to inform what we're going to do, but maybe you're looking for more from me to inform your decision-making process. And I do think that we need to settle the issue of, are we going to consider this lost revenue, as Matt suggested, and apply it relatively equally over the 4 budgets, including the current budget? Or do you want to look at projects specifically? And I also would say, I'm not interested in funding permanent positions with this money. If there are projects that could be advanced, like Henry mentioned, economic development, I'm happy to agree to, maybe we bring in a consultant to help us put together an ongoing framework, and we use this funding for that, but not to fund a permanent position until we know exactly what the ongoing need is.
That's a very important point, because we've been down that road before. For instance, when we got state money to fund additional positions in the police or fire department, and when the grants ran out, you had the employees who've been there for three or 4 or 5 years, who then just fell into in as a budgetary expense. I think that's a sound policy, is to not use this money to fund ongoing obligations. That may be counter to some of the things that I would like to see done, but when I hear what Matt says, I think we have one more incidence of the bald heads coming together on an approach to a problem, and I would certainly forsake my priorities to adopt a process somewhat like what he has advocated, because that just makes good common sense.
Yeah. I'm warming up to it myself. I just want to make sure people understand we have to have this money committed by December 31st, 2024. So that's fiscal year 25. So we would need to start with fiscal 22. And if you're looking to apply it evenly, with the assumption that 400,000 is already committed, that's 1.3 million per year. And there are a couple of these items that are shovel ready, so to speak, like the affordable housing. I know nobody has mentioned the premium pay this evening, but that seemed to get a decent amount of positive feedback. That's something that we would be able to put together a proposal for this fiscal year. We had suggested 300,000. So if $500,000 was to sort of replace the free cash allocation to affordable housing that we've made in the last several years, plus 300,000, that's 800,000. So there's another 500,000 or so that you could consider for fiscal 22. But then I think relatively, well, we need to be thinking about fiscal 23 as well, because we have town meeting coming up relatively quickly.
So to answer your question, Carrie, about whether the board wants to follow the staff's priorities or the staff wants to follow the board's priorities, I think it's a little of both. It's collaboration, and it's always hard to get started. And in the end, if we collaborate, it doesn't matter if we use one process or the other, as long as everybody feels that they're having input and all the ideas are on the table. And I think that you've heard some ideas today you could take back to the staff and then come back to us again, and we can just go back and forth a few times and get somewhere at least. Susan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was warming to Matt's idea too, and also thinking that we're not talking about operating expenses. We're really talking about capital, because, well, in terms of positions anyway, because those are long-term commitments, and we have a 4-year window for this funding. So I think that's another way to frame it. Or unless the operating is like like Carrie suggested, a one-time thing, not a commitment for the long term, for a position or something that is annually needed to be funded.
Okay, well then, may I suggest, Carrie, that if you have some more questions for us tonight, go for it, and otherwise maybe take back what you've heard and then come back in, a month or two, or with a memo or on our agenda or whatever, and we'll continue. But I think we're actually making some progress, believe it or not, because we actually have some consensus. I mean, one of the things about the parking, I think we would like to see what can be done about that.
Yeah, I'm satisfied that I have enough input from the board to advance this. And I think putting it on an agenda, probably your second meeting in March, we could have something together with that.
Okay, great. Any other comments before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't want people to take away that I'm opposed to these different initiatives. I really hope that we sooner or later can get to most or almost all of them. It's just that's the way that we are committing funds to them that is really the foundation of my comments tonight. And I do think that the most legitimate way to start would be an allocation to free cash for FY 2022, because that's, first of all, there is a demonstrated need, and secondly, there is a clear process. So,
Okay.
and then we can worry about FY 23 in the course of FY 23. I mean, we're working on FY 23 now, but yeah,
Right.
there's some opportunity there still.
And building up our free cash also helps with our bond rating, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so many ways, and it just responds to the whole business of lost revenue more than almost anything else could.
Okay, and I like the collaboration that we give ideas and we hear back from staff and we go back and forth. I think this will probably work pretty well. Okay, thank you. It's always difficult when you have so many good ideas to try to prioritize. So moving in the right direction there. And now we're going to move on to code of conduct, which I think is probably going to be a pretty brief conversation. And then another brief one on the DEI. Let me just say about the code of conduct that I'm not really sure where we are with this. When I first imagined it, it was much different from what we have before us in the packet. And I finally figured out that I think we're talking about two different things. The one we have in our packet is a proposed code of conduct for boards and committees. And that might be needed, and we should probably take a look at that. There's also some towns that have done a code of conduct for what they call visitors to town hall. And this was before COVID. But several communities have had some disruptions in their town hall where people were disrespectful, rude, or whatever. And so what should staff do about that? So that's what my original idea was about code of conduct. So we have sort of two different things and they're related. And I'm not sure if we want to do both of them, one of them, neither of them. So this may be an initial discussion to see what the board would like to do.
I would hope that we don't waste a lot of time talking about it. There's so many, if you try to actually look at what it says, it raises so many questions, and also is so complicated that you could not expect anybody to completely remember or to comply with it. And all it does is raise one more obstacle to people wanting to serve on town boards and committees. There are enough obstacles that we have to deal with without having to deal or live within another set of rules, most of which just describe what is normal, decent conduct And when people do not behave in accordance with the norms that are generally accepted, we have ways to deal with it. And we don't need rules and regulations of this type. It's almost, I would consider it almost offensive to ask people to not only adhere to something like this, but also then to ask them to sign it when they accept a position. I think it's just insulting to people, and it's useless and offensive. What else? What else can I say? If you want me to know how I really feel,
Right.
I'd be glad to tell you.
Right. Okay. Other comments, Susan?
Well, there are some parts of this that we already have to sign off on, like procurement laws, public records law, the meeting law. But I think it's important that we have a common, and this may not be the answer to it, but that we're all on the same page in terms of our conduct. As one of the things it mentions is if you're on a board or if you're an elected official, this is my interpretation of it, you represent that body. You cannot say, oh, I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, that's appropriate sometimes, but you are viewed as representing the school committee, the select board, the housing authority. And I think it's important that that be stated in some fashion. And also the rules about what we hold confidential, especially with regard to executive session, and what we are public about, which is anything we discuss in the public meetings. But I think that that needs to be fairly clear. The purpose of executive session and we know what the allowable reasons are to hold executive session, but we need to include that it means that it stays in that meeting, for instance. So I think we need some clarification, but I don't know if 5 pages is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little surprised about the extensiveness and formality of this, to the degree to which it went. On the other hand, when I read it a second and a third time, I found some of these sections helpful reminders and perspective building in terms of roles. And as I went through some of these sections, thinking, yes, I've seen that done, which may not have been the best practice for a committee or board member. And I was able to identify that all the way through most of those sections. So in that sense, taking the positive side of that, it was a helpful reminder in terms of best practice expectations in many of these categories. So that was one reaction I had to it. I did, in terms of some of the fine print, I was concerned about whether we actually had some of these policies in place that it was referring to. And if we have, I may or may not have seen them myself.
Right.
And so that was one thing I would want to check. And I do think that there's a section here that tries to outline the, again, best practice in relationship with the town manager's office and the town manager position. And I would express it a little differently than the wording that they chose in a couple of those sections. But I think that has been an issue that we've heard about over a couple years. And I think I know at least in a couple surrounding towns, this topic has been tackled fairly early with boards about relationships. And so I think it's more and more on the horizon of anyone who's applying to be a town manager. So in that sense, I thought it was good to have that section. I would just word it a little differently than I saw it worded. So,
So, so you might be all right if we called it best practice expectations instead of code of conduct and made it a little briefer and to make sure that all of the fine print refers to actual policies that we do have.
I think that's a good summary. And I do think committees would benefit from it as well.
If you want to do it in a civilized way, a great model is Ruth Lauer's handbook. I think that's directed mostly to the select board itself, but a book that is more narrative and descriptive, and not a set of rules, but a set of a summary of what the traditions and practices are and what they have been and what the expectations are, and put it in the form of a handbook or a guidebook rather than in a new set of rules and regulations with penalties and consequences and all of that stuff, which is, I just don't think that fits.
Mhm. Right. Make it a friendlier tone. Thank you for volunteering. Here's some guidance rather than all this penalized, emphasis on penalties and all of that. Okay. Matt, what is your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of the other views of the board that, the document's 100% punitive at the moment. I'd really like to see a guide for board and committee members, that would include kind of rules of the road. Yeah, what you got to do. When I first read it, I kind of thought, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Do we have a problem here? I had assumed that the code of conduct would be addressing kind of a broader, all participants in the process, not just the board and committee members. I also thought it should, besides being friendlier, that it should reflect kind of what's specific to Concord. Concord has a great tradition of citizen government and, proud past and all this stuff. And we make no reference to any of it. And when you get to things like, self-dealing, we already do have conflict of interest info that people already review. So it's kind of like we're doubling down and I just read it and I kind of felt bad, like, gosh, I'm not a very good person.
Yeah.
That's all. It just didn't feel good. So I hope we can come up with a better approach.
Well, as I'm listening to this, I'm actually thinking that we did have a handbook for elected and appointed officials that came out of the town clerk's office.
Yeah. And people go through the training and, but it's mostly like, okay, open meeting law, conflict of interest.
Right.
Yeah.
We already have all that part.
Communications. Yeah.
Right. But we already have this guidebook and it already has a lot of that in it. Maybe if we just add some more about Concord's traditions and maybe the part about working with the town manager isn't in that guidebook. And maybe we could just add a few little sections to that guidebook that already exists.
And I've often wondered, like, okay, just delineating, like, what's the chair do? What's the clerk do? What's, and I know that there's some variations based upon committees. Some committees have town staff support. So what's town staff support do in those cases? If you don't have town staff support, what do you do? I mean, really, committee members are often a little bewildered, especially about open meeting law, but about other details of our town process. And, when do you have to take a vote? Do you have to take a vote on everything? Do you have to take a vote to adjourn? The 100 things,
Right. So I'd like to ask Carrie if you think that maybe sometime this year, not tomorrow or anything, that maybe you and Kari would take a look at how to put some of the, whatever is missing from our handbook, add to it. Susan?
Well, Carrie had, I think it was the first meeting, presented us with information about different, this is specific to interaction with the town manager's office, about if you have, and she delineated if you have staff support, if you don't have staff support, you know, sort of what the, where the boundaries were, and that it was good guidance
Right.
that we've already done, or she's already done.
So I think we could, at some point in the not too distant future, pull the best out of all of the documents that have been mentioned here this evening and put together a draft handbook for you to take a look at.
Great. Great. I think, unlike ARPA, I think we have a consensus on this. We want a friendly document that thanks people for volunteering and puts a positive spin on things in a friendly tone and gives good guidance and advice.
And includes maybe a little bit, sorry, it includes a little bit more maybe on when recruiting new committee members to consider DEI.
Yeah. That sounds good. Okay, thank you, Carrie, for working on that. We'll take another look whenever you're ready with the draft of that. So I'd like to move on to the DEI issue. And I just basically, what this is about is I was at a school committee meeting. The school committee has hired a consultant. They will be doing training over 3 different sessions, 3 hours each. It will be public meeting, but it's a workshop where they're going to 3 sessions run by a professional facilitator. And these are some of the topics that they'll be talking about. And I'm wondering if the select board wants to do some type of DEI training where we learn more about, you know, white privilege, microaggressions, how can we set policy better? Do we want to think about getting a consultant to lead us in some kind of DEI training?
I would welcome that. I mean, I think I feel like I'm at ground zero. I mean, just, I need all the training I can get. So it would be helpful.
Okay. Other comments?
I'm in favor of the idea. I brought it up with the DEI commission that we were considering this, and Rob Monroe, the co-chair of the commission, said he had some ideas about possible consultants. So, you know, I put a note out to him asking what his suggestions would be that we could consider among, you know, others as we look ahead to this. The other thing, you know, I want to be, we did participate in a training last fiscal year, but, you know, it ended up really almost being kind of a pitch for getting more consulting help. And so I hope that we can avoid that and really make it a self-contained process that, you know, it has an objective, you know, focused on improving our ability to be able, you know, support the town. So. One thing I was surprised, so you're saying, Terry, that this potential topics list that you have here, because I remember you had mentioned something about setting policies. I guess it's that last section, right? That exploring the first 2 bullets of the last section.
Right. So what I did was, after you and I talked, I added a few more bullets because I agree with you.
I would like to see the training include this business about, how can we be better policy makers, not just how we personally, can deal with these, having
Absolutely.
problems with this, but how we can help our overall community do better.
Right, like we had two examples tonight. One was we were talking about ARPA. We didn't really think about that in a DEI lens. And what would that mean? And then the second one, Linda just mentioned, when we put together this handbook, what about recruiting and trying to get a lot of diversity on our committees? So to help us think through whenever we have any agenda item, how are we being a welcoming town? How do we approach these issues in a different way? That's the kind of training I think will be really useful. So if you, Matt, can hear back from Rob, I think what we'd have to do though is we'd have to put out an RFP, and we'd have to have a better idea what we're looking for. Are we willing to do what the school committee is doing? Are we willing to do 3 workshops of 3 hours each? Or do we want to do one focused meeting first, see how it goes? We have to have some idea of the length of time that we're willing to put in and the types of topics that we want in order to do this RFP.
Well, I think Matt was talking about being in touch with our own DEI committee that we have charged and set up. And I would hope that one of the things that they would do would come up with some recommendations about steps that the town and the boards ought to be taking to modify their behavior to attain the objectives that we set them up to do. And I don't think that the select board is exempt from recommendations of the DEI committee any more than I would expect that the town staff would be exempt or members of other committees would be exempt. So we have somebody working on it, and I think there are a lot of very committed people on that committee, and we ought to probably ask them to consult with us about where we should be going on this.
Matt?
Informally, that's what I did put in front of the committee, the commission last meeting. And that's where I got that first suggestion, but I could kind of expand upon that in their next meeting and just, request, hey, beyond just some ideas about vendors, it really may be more ideas about the nature and scope of these training initiatives that maybe as a town, various bodies should be taking on. So I can certainly take that to them. I still do think though that it is worthwhile, for us to take a step. I think it's good that if we have the initiative, I think. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily delay.
Well, we ought to maybe start thinking about some broader scope of civic education, of which DEI is just one aspect. Another aspect of civic education is civility, and it is an attitude toward to our citizens and our employees who are the people that we serve, and that we ought to be sensitive to the fact that they are our boss and we respect them, and we need to do that. They are not our enemy, and I hope we are not their enemy, and that people ought to be treated in a way that has them leaving meetings and leaving committee hearings in a way that they feel that they've been listened to and that they were treated well. I have been at committee meetings where there were people left the meeting either in one of two states. One was apoplectic and the other was in tears. And that just should not happen in the structure of our town.
So what would you like to see, Henry, in terms of treatment?
Well, I think civic education is
Right.
DEI is just one aspect of that, and I don't mean to belittle that or minimize it, but if we're talking about how people need to behave, not that we should be the authorities on how people should behave, but if we have some thoughts about how we can get people to get along better together and respect each other more without regard to race or gender or any of those factors, we will have made a good step in the right direction.
Right. So my question is, are you suggesting that we have a consultant do a workshop for all boards and committees, or what specifically are you suggesting?
Well, one of the things that I've thought about for years is that some large companies actually train their employees in customer relations. And it was something I've been thinking about for a long time, is that should be something that we might be interested in having our employees have some training in customer relations, because we are the customers and the residents of the town are customers. And it's not like we have a lot of we don't have a lot of competition. They have to move in order to get a different town. We really need to, it's a worthwhile, I think it's a worthwhile exercise that we ought to think about.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement that the select board would like to get some more information from the DEI Commission and see what their recommendations are. And I guess I'd like the board members to think, how much time do you want to spend on these workshops? Should it be a one-time thing? Do we want to have it twice a year, every year? Or maybe we want to just see what the DEI Commission thinks we need. And should it just be for the select board? Should it be for all boards and committees? So I think, there's a lot to think about here. And as Henry says, we also probably do need some more training in civility and customer service. So there are a lot of different things to consider here. So I don't feel that we're ready to write any kind of RFP at this point, even though we really need the training. So I guess we can all think about it and continue this discussion after we hear back from the DEI Commission. Does that make sense?
I'd be happy to initiate that conversation. Of course, they, just held their last meeting last week, so it's going to be a few weeks before they meet again.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Moving on. We did liaison reports last week and it got on the agenda accidentally. I don't have anything, but some of you might have a brief report. Susan?
Yeah, I had 3 meetings in the last week. The West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee met on the 8th, and they had continue their discussion about the mural and decided that the unveiling, so to speak, may be in conjunction with Porch Fest, which is September 24th. And that's a note. And they wanted to kind of combine it with some lectures on West Concord industrial history and some other activities that would be of interest to the public. The Commission on Disability met, and they talked about White Pond. Phil Posner presented the article that he's sponsoring as a citizen petition about funding for a study about the Reformatory Branch Trail, and asked for the committee's support. But the committee or commission deferred on that to give members a chance to think about it and perhaps talk about it at the next meeting. White Pond Advisory Committee, I was not able to attend, but their focus lately is on the access to the pond from the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, access from Route 117, the new development that's going in just over the line in Sudbury, and the review of their visitor management plan. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Other people?
I had another call from the Celebrations and Ceremonies Committee asking me what the board wanted to do about Patriots Day this year. I believe we discussed this briefly at an earlier meeting, and the question was raised, well, what are they ready to do? And I think they are waiting for us and we are waiting for them. And Patriots Day is probably already too close in the future for us to really do anything. But I don't think we've made a decision about whether we're going to hold a Patriots Day parade and all the ceremonies this year or not. And it doesn't sound like they're, that they're ready to go if we say yes. But I think we ought to make a decision. We have, what is it? March. We have 2 months. And is that one of the things we have to consider is if we do want to revive it. And I think there's a lot of taste out there for getting back to normal. And we've missed the Patriots Day parade for so many years for one reason or another that people have almost forgotten about it. And do we want to let it slide for another year, or do we want to go all and make it happen?
Okay, so that's a very good point, Henry. Is the select board, so you said the celebrations committee is waiting for the select board to make a decision on this?
That's the way it sounded to me.
Okay.
Do they have any, I know in the past that they've come to, they've made recommendations, and I know that there's a big lead time for getting the, militia from Michigan and the usual participants. But I thought that they would have an internal conversation about what they were thinking, like in conjunction with us, that they would propose yes or no.
Can I tell them if they think they can make it happen, that we would like to see it go forward? Or should I say, we need more time is needed to do it properly? Or maybe we can do something that's a little bit less ambitious this year, but still marks the occasion and involves a parade, and maybe you don't have bands coming from all over the world. We don't have to reproduce a Super Bowl this year.
It'd be good rehearsal for 2025.
Right. I would definitely say if they can do something, I would really support it.
Okay.
When you're looking at COVID, activities outside are usually pretty safe. So if they can put a parade together, if they can, it's short notice, but I'd be in support of it. What do others think? Matt, you've had your hand up a while.
Well, my hand was up for other reasons, but related to the Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee. But I mean, I'm a little concerned, having been the liaison in the past, that the clock is really running tight on doing something. You want to make sure that it comes together if it is scheduled. So that I worry that there may not be enough time at this point. But if there is, yeah, I agree. An outdoor event is a better thing. It's easier to run, and certainly the numbers are going the right direction now. It looks like, mask mandates are perhaps expiring. So, the conditions seem to be improving. We've just been surprised before, but hey, we can. While I've got the mic, though, I did want to ask about the public ceremonies and celebrations committee, because I also think that right now is usually the period where the honored citizen process is going on. And I did send a note to their official, email address, as also to Jessica separately. Have not heard back. I wanted to make a nomination, and currently there's still the 2021 form out on their page on the town website. If you click on their agendas link, it goes to a October meeting. I think there's a little care and feeding that maybe that committee may need at the moment. But anyway, I would really like to know, is there a Concord honored citizen process this year? And if so, how do people, make nominations? So.
Okay, I will get back to them and ask those questions.
Okay, very good. Henry, are you all set then with your report?
So I think it would also,
the town manager's report has become so thorough
Right.
that it really covers a lot of the issues that would normally be covered in liaison reports. So I'm not going to repeat what's already been presented.
Okay, Linda?
I would just add to Henry's discussion with the committee that the April Dawn Salute is also another event.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things we also have to do, is we have to authorize the independent battery to fire their cannon. That usually is a process that they have to go through with the board, I think, on each occasion.
Okay, so I could put that on the next agenda. Is that kind of a consent agenda item, or do we have to have a discussion with them?
Typically, we have a discussion.
Right,
By
okay,
tradition, we have a discussion.
all right.
Is that March 7th?
Well, we're going to have a short meeting on February 28th. We might be able to fit it in then. It depends. I'd like,
Or it's okay to do it in March too.
well, is that enough notice for them?
I think so.
Okay,
I think that's tight. So if you can do it February 28th, I think it would be better, but
I mean, typically they're going over their procedures, so they need to have those all in place.
who
right
is,
for the
who is
year.
the liaison for this? Is it Henry?
I am to the committee, yes. But unfortunately, they meet on the same night as some other committee on the liaison too.
Okay, but if you would double check with the chair and ask them, would they prefer to come in really briefly on the 28th of February? Or do they want to have a regular discussion, but we can't put them on until March 7th? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, great.
28 or longer on 3/7. Okay, I assume that anybody in their right mind would prefer sooner, briefer.
Yeah, yep, I think so. Okay, any other liaison news?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that at the DI Commission meeting, that Deputy Town Manager Kate Hodges presented a proposal to add DEI content to the biannual town survey. And it looked like a really good opportunity. I think what she mentioned was that the town survey, it shows a lot of consistency in response year to year, which it on the one hand is a good thing. It shows the consistency of our services and process, and you know, but the downside is that it just means that we don't necessarily learn a lot from it, because we just go, oh, yep, everything's still on track. And instead, we could use the survey instrument, which has really good participation, has like a 20% response rate, you know, and it's town wide, to actually understand from the public kind of some issues around DEI. So I think it's an excellent opportunity, and I hope we take advantage of it, because, you know, we already have kind of funding set for that, and the citizens already have I think familiarity with it as a process. And if we did a sort of a one-off survey, we'd be much less likely to get a representative response. So I hope we can do it.
That's a great idea. And when is the survey next going to be done?
It would be
No.
this summertime, I think, right, Carrie? I mean, it could be as soon as the summertime. It has to be in FY23. It can't be any sooner than that.
Yeah, it's probably more like September or October.
And that'd probably be a
Good.
better time frame anyway.
Okay, sounds great.
And then I also attended the, well, I actually didn't attend in person, but I watched the video for the municipal light board meeting, where they continue to have very long discussions about rate design. You know, it's a very complicated process. And then also the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee, of course, that is getting prepared for the forum on Wednesday. So, you know, a lot of content around that, and then the survey that they're doing.
Great. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to committee nominations.
I have some committees to talk about.
Oh, sorry, Linda. For some reason I thought, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right.
I thought
Um,
you,
Carrie in her report mentioned that Middlesex has added 4 units of affordable faculty housing, which is terrific. Employer taking care of their employees when we have challenges in town to do so otherwise. The Affordable Housing Trust met again. They have now finalized their policy guidelines. And this week they meet again with this housing group and planning department stakeholders for any comments, further comments they have on what the committee considers the trust considers to be their final policy guidelines. And as soon as that feedback is in, we're set up to come to the select board with those policies for the trust. The historical commission really has a lot on their plate and are really working hard, I have to say. We know the warrant article is coming for the scenic road bylaw. They're also dealing with some MassDOT and federal department is involved as well in terms of the improvement work for 2A Battle Road. And there have been a lot of issues because the commission was named as a partner for review on this process, and it didn't get off the ground. But after some working with the legislators, everyone's has this on their radar now, and the process is in place. And I know we're going to be hearing more about that at the upcoming select board meeting. So that's good. The other thing related to the historical commission was the coffees, the historic commission coffees that I've mentioned before. And this most recent one covered all the topics that the committee's covering, but they also had quite a few comments about the Mass Audubon plans or purported plans for this being a center almost a museum center in a sense, and concerned that a lot of more traffic would be coming in and there isn't parking to accommodate that, and it would change. And the person in charge of this at Mass Audubon assured the committee that the town would be hearing much more about this and there would be opportunity for input, excuse me. And then the Junction Village has a site visit and in March planned, and a forum in April to talk about the Junction Village open space plan for that area, so that you'll hear more about that. And that's the highlights.
Okay, thank you. Now we will move on to nominations.
Eric Macy of 225 Prairie Street to the trustees of town donations for a term to expire on December 31st, 2025.
All right, and committee appointments.
Move to appoint John J. Arena the third of 70 Beharrell Street, Unit 327 to the Concord 2025 Executive Committee for a term to expire on December 31st, 2025.
Second,
Roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Bates,
Aye.
Mr. Dane,
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye.
and myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Okay, thank you to Mr. Arena for volunteering for that. Miscellaneous correspondence. We have a letter to Governor Baker from the Concord Historic Commission related to the Battle Road that Linda was just discussing, and we will be hearing more about that in March when they come before the select board. There is a pamphlet from Minuteman Regional Vocational High School explaining their value to the business community. And we have a letter from Peter Gifford and his neighbors about Estabrook Woods. And at this time, we will entertain any public comment. Tanya? Tanya, you're on mute.
Sorry, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. Thank you. Thank you for another great meeting. Just 2 or 3 different things. One about the ARPA funds. That was a great discussion. I just want to highlight that whatever Matt was suggesting in terms of letting citizens decide at town meeting is not any less transparent than the discussion that you had today at the select board, and that they are both very valuable. So both to hear what our select board members are thinking and to ultimately let town meeting decide, these are both wonderful approaches to whatever is going on. About DEI and conduct issues, I recently sent a letter to Rob Monroe, actually, and Matt was copied as liaison. And I think it's I was explaining my own internal experiences from being raised an Armenian in Turkey, about my internal experiences of knowing about discrimination and marginalization and even fear for one's security. And therefore the internal dynamics being similar to the people of color in this country, as well as other marginalized groups. And I would suggest there is an interesting, this is a very personal sharing. I won't go into the details of my life or anything, but there is an interesting intersection between civility and DEI, because people from different backgrounds do have different ways of expressing themselves. And that's also good to keep in mind when discussing conduct and civility, to sort of allow for a range of expressions without necessarily judging something as uncivil, unless it you know, and if it is truly uncivil, like a slander or hate speech or whatever, I mean, I think there are ways, the chair always has the prerogative to just cut someone off. So, and it is also great to consult the DEI Commission. Perhaps you could share the training with the school committee and save money on hiring another consultant. I don't know. Anyway, I might forward you some of the letters I wrote, whatever. Thank you. And one other thing is that, yes, I just found out today that the Commission on Disability had heard one of the town meeting articles on the Reformatory Branch Trail. So I sent a note requesting that the other one be heard at their next meeting also. So thank you very much for a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Hartman.
Thanks, Terry. My name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but I'm speaking for myself tonight. I have a few comments about the Assabet Bridge project. Because I live in Concord Green, I'll use that bridge, and a lot of my neighbors will too. And I've been watching this process now for like 10 years. And I remember going to a community outreach event put on by Greenman and Pedersen in 2017, where they talked about different types of bridges and different locations for the bridges. And the estimate then was about a few $1 million to build the bridge. And at the time, being on the Finance Committee, I was aware that that money was probably going to come from the town's capital budget and or maybe some contributions from local businesses. So I was delighted tonight to find out that the construction cost for this bridge is going to be paid for, hopefully by the TIP program. And I understand that's still tax money, but I think we pay a lot of state and federal taxes, so I'm okay with taking those funds to help build this bridge. So for $710,000, it sounds like we're going to be able, hopefully we'll get a bridge that we'll use in our community without having to spend millions of dollars. So that was good news to me tonight. So thank you to Elizabeth Hughes and any other member of the town staff that made that, that is making this possible. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good. Pamela, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to remind us that if we're doing renovations to town buildings such as the Ripley, particularly if we're replacing a boiler, we must not replace it with fossil fuel. We must do heat pump electric heat. The climate crisis is such that it is absolutely irresponsible for anyone to spend any money on fossil fuel infrastructure. Plus, it wouldn't cost more, it would cost less, and the running of the building will be massive savings too. So let's all keep our sustainability goals in mind, please. And thank you for a wonderful meeting. I always like it when I learn something.
Thank you.
One other thing, I never did get to ask the old town manager to explain to me the actual cost benefit of putting the parking meters in. And I understand that various businesses are afraid that the parking spaces near their businesses would be filled with employees of other businesses and so on. But as that doesn't seem to work on Sundays when we don't have meters, it doesn't seem to me that it's a wise spending of money to put meters in unless there's a distinct advantage, documentable advantage to the town to do so.
Okay. We've talked about this before and it's going to be on our agenda again. So thank you for those comments. Okay.
I thought I should also just mention that, of course, we did consider the possibility of joining with the school committee in their DI training, but the consultant that they're employing specializes in working with school committees as opposed to municipal governments.
Right. That's one of the reasons. There's several reasons why it's not going to work out, but that's definitely one of them, right? Okay. Is there any other public comments? Seeing none, we will have a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to return to open session.
So move to adjourn to executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares.
Second,
So declare. Okay. We have a second?
second,
Right. Roll call vote.
Ms. Ackerman,
Aye.
Ms. Bates,
aye.
Mr. Dane,
Aye.
Ms. Escobedo,
Aye.
and myself, Mr. Johnson, aye.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We will see you in a few minutes on the other Zoom link.
All right, thanks.